Here is the question the Nigerian political class does not want you to sit with too long. In every presidential election since 1999, no opposition ticket has ever successfully merged a Southeast candidate with a Northwest candidate on the same ballot. Not once. The religious and regional arithmetic has always collapsed under the weight of ego, distrust, and last-minute defections. So when Peter Obi, the man who came closer to breaking the two-party stranglehold in 2023 than any candidate in a generation, walks into the Nigeria Democratic Congress and names Rabiu Musa Kwankwaso as his running mate, you have to ask a harder question than most analysts are asking. The question is not, can this ticket win? The real question is, has Nigeria's opposition finally learned how to build a coalition that does not fall apart before the election? And if it has, what does that mean for the most consequential election this country will face in decades? Stay with me, because what is quietly being constructed inside the NDC is not just an alliance, it is a structural challenge to the way presidential power has been assembled in Nigeria for 26 years. And by the time this video is over, you will understand exactly why that matters. Before we go any further, if you are new to this channel, welcome. Niger Insight Desk exists for one reason: to give you the kind of analysis that goes beyond the headlines and the noise. Subscribe now, because this conversation is about to get deeper. To understand what just happened, you need to understand the road that led here, and it is shorter than most people realize. Peter Obi did not arrive at the NDC by accident. He left the Labour Party after it became increasingly clear that the party's internal structure could not sustain a national presidential campaign at the level that 2027 demands. The resources were not there. The grassroots organization outside the South was fragmenting. And critically, the legal disputes that had been tearing the party from within were showing no sign of resolution. The move to the ADC was the first step in a repositioning strategy. But the ADC came with its own complications, its own internal disagreements, its own legal entanglements, and a leadership architecture that was never designed to carry a presidential ambition of this scale. The NDC then became the destination, and the timing of the announcement, Obi confirmed as the NDC flag bearer, Kwankwaso named running mate within hours, was not accidental. This was a choreographed rollout designed to land as a single news cycle that would be impossible to fragment into competing narratives. Kwankwaso's own journey to this moment is equally significant. The former Kano state governor has spent years building what political analysts call the Kwankwasia movement, a grassroots political machine in Kano and across the Northwest that is not tied to the APC, not tied to the PDP, and fiercely loyal to the man himself. In 2023, he ran on the NNPP ticket and demonstrated that his support base was real, measurable, and transferable. What the NDC has now done is join two of the most distinct and independently verifiable support blocks in Nigerian politics, the Obedient movement in the south and the Kwankwasia in the north, and place them on the same ticket in the same party under the same manifesto. That has never been attempted at this structural level before, and the question that opens before us now is whether the architecture will hold. But here is something nobody is discussing yet, and it is the thing that will determine whether this ticket lives or dies long before a single vote is cast. We will get to it. But first, we need to understand the institutional landscape this ticket is entering. The first institution that matters here is INEC, the Independent Electoral Commission. For a presidential ticket to be viable in Nigeria, it must clear INEC's registration thresholds, satisfy the constitutional spread requirements under Section 134 of the 1999 Constitution, and demonstrate genuine party structure across two-thirds of Nigeria's states. The NDC is a registered party, but registration and operational capacity are two different things entirely. The APC and the PDP have spent decades building state-level party machinery, ward executives, local government coordinators, agents who know how to file forms, challenge results, and defend mandates in court. The NDC does not yet have that at scale. That is not an opinion. That is a structural fact that Obi's own camp has acknowledged implicitly by the speed with which they are now recruiting state-level coordinators. INEC's role in 2027 will also be shaped by whatever reforms emerge or fail to emerge from the Electoral Act review that the National Assembly has been deliberating. If electronic transmission of results is strengthened, that benefits a ticket that relies on urban youth turnout. If it is weakened or reversed, the old machinery of result manipulation becomes more relevant, and the NDC does not yet have the legal army to contest that machinery at every coalition center across 36 states. The second institution that matters is the judiciary. Nigerian presidential elections are not only won at the ballot box, they are also won or lost in the election petition tribunals. In 2023, the Presidential Election Petition Court's ruling effectively settled what the streets of Abuja were disputing for months. Anyone building a presidential campaign in 2027 must have a legal strategy that runs parallel to the political one from day one. The third institution worth examining is the National Assembly. If the Obi Kwankwaso ticket were to win the presidency, it would inherit a legislature that is currently dominated by the APC. A president without a working majority in the National Assembly, as Nigerians saw during the tail end of the Jonathan years, is a president who cannot pass budgets cleanly, cannot confirm ministers without negotiation, and cannot implement structural reform without political horse trading. That is a governing constraint that no campaign advertisement will resolve. And here is where deliberate ambiguity enters the picture. The NDC has not yet publicly laid out how it intends to build legislative traction if it wins the executive. That ambiguity may be a deliberate strategy, do not show your hand until you have to, or it may reflect a gap in the campaign's thinking that will cost them later. Either way, it is a question voters and analysts should be pressing. Now, let us stop here for a moment, because most of the commentary you will read about this ticket is focused on whether Obi and Kwankwaso personally get along. That is the wrong frame entirely. In Nigerian presidential politics at this level, personal chemistry is almost irrelevant. What matters is whether each principal is delivering their block and whether the blocks can be held together under the pressure of a campaign that will be attacked from multiple directions simultaneously. So, let us look at what each principal actually brings to the table. Peter Obi brings the Obedient Movement, a network of digitally organized, predominantly young, South-focused voters who demonstrated in 2023 that they could mobilize turnout in places the Labour Party had never traditionally been competitive. He also carries the Southeast, where the combined sense of political marginalization and the symbolism of a Biafran descendant running for the presidency creates an emotional investment that translates into votes. Kwankwaso brings the Northwest, specifically Kano, which is the single largest voting bloc in the country when fully mobilized. In 2023, he won Kano State outright at the presidential level. That was not a statistical accident. It was the product of years of investment in education, scholarships, and grassroots community structures that created real loyalty, not transactional loyalty. The mathematical case for this ticket is therefore not difficult to construct. Southeast plus Kano plus diaspora youth turnout in Lagos and Abuja could, in theory, produce a competitive national result. The political science is there. But here is where strategy becomes complicated. The APC's response to this ticket will not primarily be electoral, it will be institutional. The playbook is familiar. Regulatory pressure on the party, legal challenges to the candidacy, incentives offered to key NDC state coordinators to defect, and a media environment shaped to question the ticket's seriousness before it can consolidate public perception. The PDP, meanwhile, is in an existential positioning crisis. Its 2027 candidate has not yet emerged with clarity. If Atiku Abubakar runs again, or if a consensus northern PDP candidate emerges, the Northwest vote that Kwankwaso is supposed to deliver becomes contested. Kwankwaso's vote is real, but it is not infinitely transferable. If Atiku campaigns hard in Kano, some of those numbers move.
And this brings us to a factor that neither the NDC campaign nor most analysts are pricing correctly into their forecasts. It involves something happening right now in the PDP's Northern Caucus that, if it develops in a particular direction, fundamentally changes the geometry of this race. We will come back to it, but first, let us talk about what is at stake for ordinary Nigerians if this contest produces the result the NDC is projecting. Who loses from this development? The APC loses the narrative of inevitability. For the past year, Tinubu's path to a second term has been framed as structurally secure. A divided opposition, a weakened Labour Party, no credible northern challenger. The Obi Kwankwaso announcement directly disrupts that narrative, and narrative in Nigerian politics is not nothing. It shapes donor behavior, defection calculations, and the willingness of state governors to distance themselves from a president they quietly believe is vulnerable. Who is conspicuously silent? Watch the PDP's southern governors carefully. Several of them have not offered any public comment on the NDC ticket. That silence is not neutral. They are calculating whether alignment with the NDC, or at least studied neutrality, serves their 2027 governorship calculations better than loud APC solidarity.
Here is a number that should reframe how you think about what is coming. Approximately 40% of Nigeria's registered voters are between the ages of 18 and 35. In 2023, that cohort showed it could organize, show up, and refuse to be bought. In 2027, they will be 4 years older, 4 years angrier, and 4 years better at the specific mechanics of election defense. Any candidate who fails to speak credibly to that bloc is not just losing votes, they are losing the energy that keeps a campaign alive under institutional pressure. The Obi Kwankwaso ticket's core challenge on the national level is therefore not just about winning, it is about governing credibility. If this ticket wins, it inherits an economy under severe structural stress, naira depreciation that has not yet bottomed, an inflation rate that is compressing household purchasing power at every income level, a debt service ratio that is consuming a historically large share of government revenue, and a security architecture in the northwest and northeast that has not produced durable stability. The NDC has not yet released a detailed economic policy framework that matches the ambition of its political announcement. That gap matters because in a country where international investors are watching the electoral cycle for signals about policy continuity or disruption, a credible economic program is not just good governance preparation, it is campaign infrastructure. On the question of ethnic and regional tensions, the Obi Kwankwaso ticket carries symbolic weight that cuts in two directions simultaneously. It is, on one reading, the most geographically integrative presidential ticket in Nigeria's post-military democratic history. On another reading, its very novelty makes it a target because it disrupts the patronage networks that northern and southern political elites have spent a generation calibrating. For Nigerians living below the poverty line, the majority of citizens who are furthest from the rooms where these decisions are made, what this ticket means in practice depends entirely on whether its policy commitments on food security, healthcare, and decentralized economic opportunity are real, funded, and executable. Symbolism does not fill a market. Nigeria's 2027 election will be watched on the continent with an attention that its domestic political commentariat sometimes underestimates. ECOWAS has been through a period of historic stress. The coups in Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Guinea have produced a regional body that is simultaneously more assertive in rhetoric and more constrained in operational capacity than at any point in its history. Nigeria is ECOWAS. Without Nigerian diplomatic weight, financial contribution, and military credibility, the organization does not function as a meaningful institution. A contested or disputed 2027 Nigerian election does not just produce a domestic governance crisis, it produces a regional power vacuum at a moment when that vacuum is most dangerous. For the United States, the United Kingdom, and the European Union, Nigeria's 2027 election sits at the intersection of two concerns: democratic backsliding in West Africa and energy security. Nigeria remains the continent's largest oil producer. Any political instability that disrupts production or investment in the energy sector resonates in Washington and Brussels before it reaches its full domestic impact in Abuja. For the Nigerian diaspora in the United Kingdom, the United States, and Canada specifically, the Obi name carries particular resonance.
In 2023, diaspora mobilization, social media pressure, fundraising, and the symbolic weight of Nigerian professionals abroad endorsing Obi was a measurable part of the campaign's energy. Whether that same diaspora can be re-energized for a candidate who has now changed parties twice in 2 years is a legitimate question. The emotional investment of 2023 was partly about the man and partly about the Labour Party as a vehicle for generational change. The vehicle has changed, the man has not. The question is whether the energy follows the man or mourns the vehicle. Let us steelman the strongest case against this ticket, because dismissing it would be intellectually dishonest, and this channel does not do that. The strongest argument against the Obi Kwankwaso ticket is not about personalities, it is structural. Nigeria's presidential elections are ultimately decided by the party with the deepest penetration at the ward level. The people who move voters, who guard result sheets, who know which local government official can be pressured and which cannot. The ACP and the PDP built those networks over decades. The NDC, as currently constituted, does not have them at the scale that a presidential election requires. Obi's 2023 performance was extraordinary given the Labour Party's structural limitations, but he still lost, and the margin he lost by, despite the energy, despite the diaspora, despite the social media wave, tells you how significant the machinery gap actually is. The NDC is not a bigger machine than the Labour Party was in 2023, not yet. The second serious argument is about coalition durability. Nigerian political alliances have documented history of fracturing under the pressure of governorship calculations, vice presidential slot negotiations, and the entry of federal patronage into the picture. The Obi Kwankwaso alliance needs to survive a campaign season in which the Tinubu administration will have both the resources and the institutional levers to make staying in the coalition expensive for anyone below the principal level. The most common misconception on social media right now is that this ticket is already competitive because it is generating excitement. Excitement is not votes. The 2023 election proved that enthusiasm can fill squares and still lose elections. The NDC needs structural capacity, not just momentum.
What this means for Nigeria's democratic trajectory is both sobering and important. The emergence of a credible third-force presidential ticket, regardless of whether it wins, forces the dominant parties to compete harder, present better candidates, and make more serious policy commitments. That competitive pressure is itself a democratic good. Even a loss that is close and clean is better for Nigerian democracy than a walkover. Now, back to the PDP's Northern Caucus. Here is what is developing quietly. A significant faction within the PDP's northern governors and senators is calculating that if Tinubu runs for a second term, their best political futures do not lie in APC loyalty. Some of them are exploring whether a formal alignment with the NDC, not a merger, but a strategic understanding, could give them cover to support the Obi Kwankwaso ticket without formally defecting from the PDP. If even 2 or 3 northern governors move in that direction, the electoral map shifts materially. Watch for quiet meetings in Abuja between NDC coordinators and PDP state executives in Sokoto, Kebbi, and Zamfara over the next 6 months. If those meetings are happening, you will know. The 3 most likely next moves from the key actors are these. First, the APC will attempt to peel Kwankwaso away from the ticket through a combination of federal patronage offers and legal pressure on NDC's state registrations. The offer will be structured not as a bribe, but as a governance arrangement, positions, contracts, federal attention to Kano. Watch whether Kwankwaso's public statements about the Tinubu administration shift in tone over the next 3 months. If they soften, the negotiation is live. Second, the NDC will move to announce state governorship candidates and National Assembly candidates in targeted states, not to win all of them, but to demonstrate that the party has legislative ambitions and to give state-level activists a reason to remain engaged. A presidential ticket without a down-ballot strategy bleeds organizational energy. Third, the PDP will attempt to consolidate around a single northern presidential candidate by the end of 2026. If it succeeds, the Northwest vote becomes triangulated between the NDC, the PDP, and possibly the APC. If it fails, Kwankwaso's vote becomes more decisive. Under what conditions does this escalate into a genuinely destabilizing election cycle?
If the APC uses federal institutions, EFCC investigations, court injunctions, INEC administrative pressure to actively disable the NDC's candidacy rather than simply compete against it. That trajectory would represent a democratic crisis, not just a political contest. Under what conditions does this produce a clean, competitive, and consequential election? If the NDC builds real ward-level structure in the next 12 months, if INEC demonstrates independence in its conduct, and if civil society sustained the pressure it applied in 2023 on result transparency. The 12-month test is simple. Where is the NDC's party structure in Rivers, Cross Rivers, Osu, and Kano by the first quarter of 2027? If the answer is credible ground-level organization, this race is genuinely open. If the answer is still primarily a social media presence and principle-level momentum, the structural gap will do what it did in 2023, swallow the excitement before the counting starts. We started with a question. Not the obvious one, not can this ticket win, but the harder one underneath it. Has Nigeria's opposition finally learned to build a coalition that does not fall apart before the votes are counted? Here is the honest answer. We do not know yet, and anyone who tells you they do is telling you what they want to believe, not what the evidence supports. What we do know is this. The Obi Kwankwaso ticket is structurally more coherent than anything the third force has attempted before. The principles bring real, independently verifiable electoral blocks. The timing of the announcement is strategically sound. The symbolic significance, a southeast-northwest ticket running outside the two parties that have governed Nigeria for 26 years, is not nothing in a country where symbolism has often moved the electorate when policy arguments fail to. But structure defeats symbolism in Nigerian elections. It has done so consistently. And until the NDC demonstrates that it is building the kind of ward-level, court-ready, result-defending organization that a presidential election demands, the most honest assessment remains genuinely competitive, not yet structurally sufficient. The thread I am leaving deliberately unresolved is this one, and it will carry us into the next video. If this ticket loses in 2027, what happens to the obedient movement, the Kwankwasia, and the broader project of building an opposition force in Nigeria that can survive a defeat and return stronger? Because the history of Nigerian third force politics is not just a history of electoral failure, it is a history of movements that collapsed the morning after. Whether the NDC has built something more durable than that is the question 2027 will answer. If this analysis gave you clarity, not agreement, clarity, share it with one person who needs to understand what is actually happening. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.